The first blow struck hard, sending William Harding, a 6-8-year-old war veteran, crashing onto the cold wooden floor. 3 men, sent by ruthless real estate tycoon Howard Crane, stood over him, demanding he sell his family land for a fraction of its worth. When William refused, they beat him mercilessly. Then, through the howling snowstorm, headlights pierced the darkness. His son, Navy Lieutenant Ethan Harding, had just returned home from Afghanistan with his loyal K-9 partner, Thor. The quiet cabin was about to become a battlefield of courage, love, and justice.
Get out of here!
Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. Your support means the world to us. Tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. The storm over Ironvale Ridge came without mercy. Snow fell in relentless waves, slashing sideways under the whip of a black wind that shrieked through the pine forests of Montana. The mountains loomed invisible behind a curtain of white, and the air itself burned cold enough to bite skin. In the heart of that wilderness, an old log cabin crouched beneath layers of snow, its chimney coughing out a thin line of smoke that vanished almost as soon as it rose. Inside, Thomas Avery sat in a worn armchair beside the wood stove, his rough hands cupped around a dented metal mug of coffee. He was 70 now, though the years had carved deeper into him than the calendar ever could. His back was bent but not broken, his shoulders still squared by the ghost of a Marine's discipline. His skin, tanned and weathered from a lifetime outdoors, was marked by scars that told stories no one had asked him to share. His gray beard was uneven, his hair clipped short as if the barber had been time itself. He stared into the fire with eyes the color of ash, calm, steady, but carrying the weight of too many midnights spent remembering what others had not survived. Once, he had led men into jungles half a world away. Now, his only mission was to endure the silence of his own thoughts. On the mantel above the fire rested an old photograph Thomas in uniform beside his wife, Helen, whose kind eyes had softened even his roughest years. She'd been gone a decade, and yet he still caught himself glancing at the door when the wind moved just right, as if she might step in carrying a tray of coffee the way she always did on stormy nights. But only the wind entered now, whispering through cracks in the wood like an old ghost, asking if he still remembered her voice. Thomas set the mug down and rubbed the stiffness from his hands. The clock on the wall ticked faintly under the roar of the blizzard. Beyond the window, the world was a blur of white and darkness. He had lived on this ridge his whole life, fought wars for it, buried family in its soil. It wasn't just land to him, it was legacy, and he guarded it like a soldier, still holding the line long after the war had ended. Then came a sound that didn't belong to winter. Tires, heavy ones, grinding against the ice-covered path that climbed to his cabin. Thomas froze. No one came up Ironvale Ridge at this hour. He rose slowly, the ache in his knees protesting the motion, and crossed to the window. Through the curtain of snow, he saw faint headlights weaving between the trees. 3 shadows moved in that light, men stepping out of a dark truck, their boots crunching over frozen ground. A knock followed, hard and deliberate. Thomas took the shotgun from beside the door, not in fear, but in habit. The weapon was older than some of the men he'd once commanded, but the barrel was clean, the stock oiled, and he still knew how to use it. He called out, "Who's there?" A smooth voice answered, muffled through the storm. "Evening, Mr. Avery. Name's Carl Denton. We're here on behalf of Drayland Holdings. Just want to talk, sir." Thomas's grip tightened around the shotgun. He knew the name everyone in the county did. Maxwell Dray, a real estate mogul from the city, had been buying land all across the valley under the guise of eco-development. Drayland Holdings was his mask, and Denton his mouthpiece. Thomas cracked the door open just enough to see three figures on the porch. The man in front, Carl Denton, was tall and broad, wearing a tailored overcoat far too fine for the weather. His slicked-back hair gleamed even under the snow, and his smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. He had the arrogance of someone used to being obeyed. Behind him stood two younger men, one lean and restless, with a twitch at the corner of his mouth. Reed, and the other built like a wall, shoulders hunched, a silent brute named Mason. Carl tipped his hat slightly. "Mind if we step in, Mr. Avery? Storm's unforgiving tonight." "You can say what you came for from there," Thomas said flatly. Carl's smile stayed. "Fair enough. Mr. Dre has taken an interest in this property. He's offering you a deal, double the appraised value. Cash. You sign tonight, and we'll leave you to your peace." Thomas's expression didn't change. "This land isn't for sale." Carl exhaled, pretending disappointment. "I was afraid you'd say that. Look, Mr. Avery, you're not getting any younger. Wouldn't it be better to let someone else take care of the place? Times are changing. You could live easy in town. Warm house, medical care, no more shoveling snow." Thomas stared him down. "You think I stayed through 2 wars, 3 blizzards, and 40 winters just to let some city vulture buy my father's bones out from under me?" Reed snickered. "Guess the old man's tougher than he looks." Carl's eyes flicked toward his. Men, a silent warning for patience. Then he looked back at Thomas. "Mr. Dre's not a man who likes to be refused, so why don't we try again with a pen this time, instead of pride?" He pulled a folder wrapped in plastic from his coat and held it out. The paper inside gleamed faintly through the cover, the logo of Drayland Holdings stamped in gold. Thomas didn't move. The wind roared through the open crack of the door, carrying a sting of cold that sliced through the fire's warmth. "You've got 5 seconds to step off my porch," he said quietly. Reed took a step forward. "Or what? You'll shoot us?" Carl raised a hand, but there was amusement in his tone now. "Careful, Reed. You know how jumpy veterans can be." That was when the laughter started low, mocking, feeding on the storm. Reed shoved the door wider, the cold bursting in like a living thing. "Come on, old man," he said, pushing Thomas backward into the room. "No need to get heroic." Thomas stumbled but didn't drop the shotgun. He lifted it halfway, but Mason's hand shot out, grabbing the barrel. The two men wrestled, the weapon slipping between their grips. The fire popped in the hearth, sparks spilling like fleeting stars. Carl stepped inside, brushing snow from his shoulders, voice still calm. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Thomas's heart hammered. He'd faced worse machine gun fire, jungle ambushes, but something about this was worse than war. This was desecration. His home, his peace, invaded by men who had no right to breathe its air. "I said get out." Reed lunged first, catching Thomas by the arm and slamming him against the wall. Pain exploded across his ribs. The shotgun clattered to the floor. Mason laughed, low and cruel. Carl bent down, picked up the weapon, and rested it on his shoulder like a trophy. Mr. Dre was right. Some people only understand pressure. Outside, thunder rolled, though no lightning followed. Just the wind, screaming through the trees like the howl of something ancient and wild. Thomas's vision blurred for a second. He could taste blood on his lip. Still, he managed to spit out the words, "You can break my bones, but you'll never own this land." Carl's expression darkened. "We'll see about that." Reed punched him across the jaw. The old man fell to his knees, one hand gripping the table for balance. The firelight flickered, painting the scene in red and gold. The folder lay open on the floor beside him, its pages fluttering like white wings in the draft. Carl's voice turned sharp. "Sign it, and we're done." Thomas looked up through the haze of pain, a bitter grin cracking his lip. "You're already done." "What's that supposed to mean?" Reed growled. And then they heard it, the low hum of an engine outside, cutting through the storm. Headlights flared against the window, slicing through the blizzard like twin blades of light. The men turned toward it, squinting. A jeep climbed the ridge road, tires spitting snow. Thomas felt something surge inside him. Not fear, not hope, but something fierce and wordless. He knew that sound. Carl cursed. Who the hell? Before he could finish, the jeep's lights illuminated the porch in a blinding wash of white. The doors opened, and two shadows emerged, one tall, the other moving low and alert. It was Captain Lucas Avery, Thomas's son, a Navy SEAL just home from Afghanistan, and beside him, the German Shepherd Ranger, his loyal K9 partner, muscles taut, eyes sharp as steel. The wind howled louder, rattling the cabin walls. Inside, the three men froze, caught between firelight and the blinding beams from outside. Thomas exhaled, the faintest smile ghosting across his bruised face. "Welcome home, son," he whispered. And as the jeep's engine idled through the storm, the balance inside the cabin shifted from fear to something far stronger. The Avery men were no longer outnumbered. The door burst open under the weight of the wind as Captain Lucas Avery stepped inside, bringing with him the sting of the blizzard. Snow trailed across the cabin floor, melting instantly on the worn wooden boards. The fire roared behind his father, throwing restless light over the chaos: overturned chairs, broken glass, and three intruders frozen mid-motion, their breath rising in white plumes. Lucas's presence changed the air. He stood tall and square-shouldered in his dark tactical jacket, the kind issued to special forces, his posture straight, controlled, and dangerous. His eyes, gray as stormlight, scanned every movement with precision. Behind him padded Ranger, his German Shepherd K9 partner, 5 years old and trained in over a dozen combat drills. The dog's coat, slick and black with tan streaks, shimmered under the firelight. His muscles rippled with quiet restraint, and his amber eyes never wavered from the men before him. "Step away from him," Lucas said, voice level and low. It wasn't loud, but it carried the authority of someone who had faced far worse than these thugs. Carl Denton turned first. His confidence faltered for the briefest second before he smoothed it over with a smirk. "Easy there, soldier boy," he said. "No one wants trouble." Lucas's hand went to his hip. The black pistol appeared like a shadow drawn from air, muzzle trained squarely on Carl's chest. "Then put your hands where I can see them." Reed's eyes darted toward Mason. He was young, barely 30, face sharp and restless, with that feverish recklessness of someone who mistakes cruelty for courage. "He's bluffing," Reed hissed, pulling a knife from his belt. The blade glinted in the firelight, and that was enough for Ranger. The dog's growl started low, a rumble that made the floor vibrate, and then he moved a streak of muscle and fury. The sound of impact cracked through the room as Ranger collided with Reed, knocking him backward onto the table. The knife clattered across the floor. Reed screamed, clutching at his arm as Ranger's jaws locked tight just below the elbow. "Thor." Lucas barked sharply, a single commanding syllable. Instantly, the dog released and pivoted to stand guard between father and intruders, his teeth bared but unmoving. Mason, the largest of the three, lumbered forward, face flushed, and fists clenched. His breath reeked of whiskey and smoke, his eyes small and mean. "You're dead, soldier," he spat, charging like a bull. Lucas sidestepped, years of instinct flowing through muscle and memory. The punch missed by an inch. Lucas's counter came quick. The heel of his hand snapped upward, striking Mason's jaw with brutal precision. The giant stumbled, hit the wall, and dropped like a felled tree. Carl Denton was the last to move. He still held Thomas's old shotgun, his knuckles white on the stock. For a moment, his eyes flicked between Lucas's gun and Ranger's snarling muzzle. "Don't," Lucas warned, his voice dropping into the kind of tone that could freeze blood. But pride is a foolish thing. Carl tightened his grip, and Lucas fired. The shot was deafening in the small cabin. A single round tore through the shotgun's wooden stock, splintering it from Carl's hands. The weapon fell harmlessly to the floor. Carl jerked backward, clutching his bleeding palm, shock replacing arrogance. "Now get out," Lucas said. "All of you." Carl hesitated, chest heaving. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he hissed, voice trembling with fury. "Maxwell Dre doesn't forgive disrespect." Lucas's expression didn't change. "Then tell him to send someone better." The three men staggered out into the storm, Reed clutching his bitten arm, Mason limping, and Carl swearing through the blood between his teeth. The blizzard swallowed them whole, headlights flickering once before vanishing into the darkness. Silence settled over the cabin, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Ranger's heavy breathing. Lucas holstered his weapon and turned to his father. "Dad," he said, stepping closer. "You all right?" Thomas Avery looked up from his chair, face pale beneath the bruises but steady. "I've had worse," he muttered, then managed a half-smile. "You didn't have to shoot my damn shotgun." Lucas chuckled, the tension in his shoulders loosening slightly. "You're welcome." He bent down and picked up the folder that had fallen near the fireplace. The embossed gold lettering read, "Dreland Holdings Corporation." He flipped it open. Inside were documents detailing a development project with maps of Iron Veil Ridge and something else, geological diagrams, marked with mineral compositions and depth readings. Thomas leaned forward, squinting at the papers. "That doesn't look like any resort plan I've seen." Lucas's eyes narrowed as he scanned the fine print. "It's not. They're not building anything. They're digging." "What the hell for?" Lucas didn't answer immediately. He'd seen maps like this before, not in real estate, but in military resource operations overseas. Lithium veins, groundwater systems, extraction points. He recognized the symbols, the chemical markers, even the way the coordinates were masked behind fake environmental studies. "Whatever's under this ridge," he said finally, "is worth a lot more than your cabin." Thomas's hand tightened around the armrest. "And Dre wants it bad enough to send thugs into my home." Lucas placed the folder on the table. "He won't stop." Ranger gave a soft whine and nudged Thomas's knee, sensing the old man's rising heartbeat. Thomas reached down to pat the dog's head, his calloused fingers brushing over the coarse fur. "Smart animal," he murmured. "He can smell bad people a mile away." Lucas nodded. "He's saved more lives than most soldiers I've met." The cabin's warmth felt different now, heavy, suffocating, filled with questions that couldn't wait till morning. Outside, the wind shrieked across the ridge like a warning. Thomas broke the silence first. "You think Dre'll send more?" "Definitely," Lucas said. "Men like him don't like being told no." He walked to the window, peering through the frost. The headlights below had vanished, leaving only a trail of churned snow where the truck had been. In the distance, the ridge loomed black against the white storm, vast and silent. "You didn't come home just to visit, did you?" Thomas asked quietly. Lucas hesitated. His breath fogged the window pane. "I was on leave," he said. "Afghanistan was different this time." His voice trailed off. Memories flashed sandstorms, a convoy ambushed in the dark, Men who didn't make it back. He swallowed hard. I needed time away. Thomas watched him for a long moment, then nodded. Well, he said softly, you found trouble instead. Lucas turned from the window and managed a weary grin. Seems like trouble always finds us first. He sat down across from his father. The firelight danced between them, casting long shadows on the walls, two silhouettes cut from the same iron. Thomas poured what was left of the coffee into two mugs, sliding one toward his son. You think this Dre fella's after the lithium deposits under the ridge? Lucas nodded slowly. Most likely. Lithium's worth more than gold these days. If he's found a way to claim it through government loopholes, he'll do anything to get it, including making sure you're out of the way. The older man's jaw tightened. Over my dead body. Ranger lifted his head, ears pricking, as if agreeing. Lucas smiled faintly. Let's make sure it doesn't come to that. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind howled louder, the storm deepening. Somewhere in the dark, the sound of an engine echoed faintly, too faint for Thomas to hear, but not for Ranger. The dog's head turned toward the window, muscles tensing. Lucas followed his gaze. Nothing but white. Still, the soldier in him didn't relax. They'll come back, he murmured. But next time, we'll be ready. He looked down at the folder again, the Drayland seal staring back at him like an accusation. He thought of men like Maxwell Dre, powerful, untouchable, protected by money and corruption. He'd seen their kind before, wearing suits instead of uniforms, but waging wars all the same. And as the storm raged beyond the walls, Lucas Avery made a silent promise. If Dre wanted a fight, he'd get one. Morning crept reluctantly over Ironvale Ridge, pale light breaking through the torn veil of the storm. The air still smelled of smoke and gunpowder, and the snow lay bruised with footprints from the night before. A thin mist clung to the trees, curling through the ravine like something alive. Inside the cabin, Lucas Avery had barely slept. His thoughts circled the Drayland folder on the table, its papers weighed down by an empty mug. He stared at the diagrams again, mineral charts, geological depth readings, all pointing to one fact. Something beneath their land was worth killing for. Thomas was at the stove, making coffee the old-fashioned way, his hand steady despite the bruises blooming purple across his jaw. You're thinking too loud, he muttered without turning. Lucas managed a faint smile. You used to say that to Mom, Thomas grunted. She used to say it back. He poured the coffee into two tin mugs, the smell filling the room, warm and bitter. So, what now? We find out what they left behind. Lucas strapped on his gloves and nodded toward the door. Ranger and I are going to sweep the ridge. They were here longer than it looked. Thomas handed him one mug and said quietly, Watch your steps, son. The snow hides more than tracks. Outside, the world had fallen eerily silent. The storm had passed, but fog rolled in thick from the valley. Ranger trotted ahead, nose low, his paws sinking softly into the frost. Lucas followed the path toward the tree line, scanning for anything that didn't belong. He was halfway down the slope when the crunch of tires reached his ears, slow, deliberate. He turned, hand instinctively brushing the grip of his pistol until the sheriff's SUV appeared through the mist. Ryan Kellen stepped out, closing the door behind him. He was in his early 40s, tall and broad with the easy strength of someone who'd once been a high school quarterback and never quite lost the stance. His sandy brown hair was thinning at the temples, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. His uniform looked worn, the badge dulled from years of service. Beneath his calm exterior was the fatigue of a man who'd seen too many small-town troubles and knew they rarely stayed small. "Morning, Luke," Ryan said, his voice a low rumble softened by concern. "Your old man called me. Said you had visitors last night." Lucas nodded, gesturing toward the ridge. 3 of Dre's men, armed, aggressive, and stupid. They left in a hurry. Ryan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Hell, I warned the council about letting that snake buy up land near the valley. Money talks louder than law around here." He crouched beside the broken snow, his eyes narrowing at the disturbed patches of earth. "These prints weren't made for walking, they were setting something up," Ranger barked once, circling near a tree trunk. Lucas followed him and saw a glint of metal, half buried in the snow. He brushed it clean, a small black device, rectangular, with a blinking red light. "Camera feed," he said grimly. "They were watching us." Ryan took it carefully with a gloved hand. "And not just you, I bet. If Dre's tracking your property, he's got eyes all over this mountain." They found more within minutes, a tiny transmitter wedged beneath the porch, another lens embedded in a birdhouse by the fence. Lucas's jaw tightened. They weren't here to scare him. They were mapping the area. Ryan straightened. "For what? Mineral rights? That's federal land up north. They can't drill here without permits." Lucas handed him one of the documents from the folder. "They already found a loophole. These surveys are disguised as environmental studies. My father's land sits on top of a lithium vein. They're trying to drive him out." Ryan whistled softly. "Jesus. Lithium. No wonder Dre sent his dogs. That stuff's worth billions now." Before Lucas could answer, the buzz of his phone cut through the stillness. The screen flashed a name he hadn't seen in years, Clara Monroe. "Give me a minute," he muttered, stepping away. He pressed the phone to his ear. "Clara?" The voice that answered was brisk, clear, and threaded with exhaustion. "Lucas Avery. Heard you made the evening news in Montana again." Despite himself, Lucas chuckled. "Still digging for trouble, I see." "Always," she replied. Clara Monroe had been a war correspondent before she turned to investigative journalism, a woman who thrived where danger lived. She was in her mid-30s, tall and slim, with sharp cheekbones and a tumble of auburn hair, usually tied back under a wool cap. Her eyes, a cold shade of blue, were the kind that noticed everything and forgave nothing. Years chasing corruption had given her both a reputation and a target on her back. "I got wind that Drayland Holdings filed a permit for geothermal research on Iron Vale Ridge. Thought of you." Lucas frowned. "You're saying this isn't just land fraud. I'm saying it's organized." Dre's been laundering money through shell companies in Nevada and British Columbia. Now he's expanding into resource extraction. He's got local officials in his pocket, zoning boards, sheriffs, maybe even a judge or two. Her voice hardened. "You're standing on something bigger than your father's property. Can you prove it?" "I can get you the trail," she said, "but not over the phone. Dre's people are sweeping calls for keywords. Meet me tonight, Silver Creek Diner, off Highway 214. Midnight." "Midnight? That's safer," she interrupted. "Less traffic, fewer eyes. Bring the file you found. And, Luke, don't come alone." The line clicked dead. Lucas stared at the phone for a moment, his breath fogging in the cold. Then he looked back at Ryan. "We've got company higher up the chain." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Who was that?" "Clara Monroe, investigative journalist, used to report with military units overseas." Ryan snorted. "So you're teaming up with the press now?" "Only the ones who don't scare easy." They returned to the cabin as the fog thickened, turning the trees into pale silhouettes. Thomas met them at the door, his expression grim when he saw the cameras laid out on the table. They were spying on us? Lucas nodded. Dre's got surveillance everywhere. Clara says he's hiding behind environmental permits to mine lithium. Thomas's eyes flashed. That bastard's not taking this land, not while I'm breathing. Ryan stepped forward. Tom, I'll do what I can legally, but this kind of power doesn't care about warrants. You should consider staying somewhere else until this cools off. The old Marine laughed, low and bitter. I didn't crawl through jungles in '68 just to run from suits with money. Lucas rested a hand on his shoulder. He's right, Dad. They'll come harder next time. I'll handle tonight's meeting. You stay here with Ranger and keep the lights off. Thomas met his gaze, reluctant but understanding. You sure about this girl, Clara? She saved my life once, Lucas said simply. I trust her. Outside, the fog had swallowed the ridge entirely. The snow had turned to a gray soup of slush, and the faint smell of oil drifted on the breeze exhaust from a car idling too far away to see. Ranger stiffened at the door, ears pricked. Lucas followed the direction of the dog's stare, but saw nothing through the mist. Just the feeling, that quiet, crawling sense of being watched. Ryan adjusted his jacket. You're not wrong. Someone's still up here. Lucas nodded slowly. Then let's make sure they don't get closer. He closed the door, locked it, and leaned against the wood for a moment, the weight of the morning pressing into his chest. The war he'd left behind had followed him home, only this time the enemy wore suits instead of uniforms. And somewhere down the mountain, in the gray silence of the fog, an unseen engine revved once before, fading into the mist. The day would not end quietly. Night fell slowly over Ironvale Ridge, heavy and silent, after a day wrapped in fog. The cabin stood like a stubborn ember in the cold, small, weathered, but alive. Through its frosted windows, the light of a dying fire cast long shadows that danced over the wooden walls. Thomas Avery sat in his worn armchair, a wool blanket draped across his knees, staring at the flames as if they could bring the past to life. Across from him, Lucas Avery cleaned his pistol with mechanical precision, though his eyes weren't on the weapon. They flicked toward his father every few seconds, studying him the way soldiers watch a horizon they no longer trust. Ranger, the German shepherd, lay between them, head resting on his paws, one ear twitching with every crack from the hearth. Outside, the world was swallowed in snow. Inside, memories began to breathe again. Thomas spoke first, voice low and steady. You remember when you were a boy, Luke? You asked me once why I never talked about Vietnam. Lucas looked up. You said there was nothing worth remembering. A ghost of a smile tugged at Thomas's mouth. I lied. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The firelight carved deep lines into his face, a face that had once been strong enough to carry command, now softened by time and regret. I was 19 when they shipped me to Da Nang. Thought I was invincible. Hell, we all did. He paused, eyes distant, watching the fire as if it burned with jungle light. There was a man in my unit, Sam Carter, tall, black kid from Chicago. Quick with a joke, quicker with a cigarette. Said he'd join up to earn enough to put his little sister through college. We were boys pretending to be soldiers, and the war didn't care either way. Lucas stayed silent. He knew this tone, the one that came when his father spoke from somewhere between memory and guilt. One night, Thomas continued, our patrol walked straight into an ambush, outside Quang Tri. The jungle lit up green tracers, the smell of burning cordite, rain turning to mud underfoot. I went down behind a fallen log, yelling for Sam. He was ahead of me, too far. His voice cracked slightly. By the time I got to him, he was gone. Just gone. For a long time, only the fire spoke. Thomas drew a slow breath. After that, I stopped writing home, stopped laughing, Stopped believing that we were the good guys. When I finally made it back, I promised myself one thing: never again would I fight for someone else's greed. He reached beside his chair, pulling out a wooden chest, small, battered, its brass latch tarnished green with age. Lucas recognized it instantly. The Avery family chest had sat untouched for years in the attic. Thomas placed it carefully on the table between them. "This belonged to your grandfather," he said. "He drew maps, real ones, the kind you made before satellites. He mapped every inch of Iron Vale before he died. Said there was something under these mountains, something he didn't trust outsiders to find." He unlatched the chest. Inside were yellowed papers, folded and worn thin like leaves. Beneath them lay a revolver, its grip wrapped in faded leather, and a small compass etched with initials H.A. Harold Avery. Thomas pulled out one of the maps, unfolding it gently on the table. The parchment crackled, the ink faint but still legible lines marking underground channels winding beneath Iron Vale Ridge like veins under skin. "See here?" He pointed with a scarred finger. "These aren't rivers, they're aquifers, and these symbols he marked mineral pockets. Lithium, manganese. Back then, nobody cared. Now, it's worth a fortune." Lucas leaned over the map, studying the patterns. His soldier's mind automatically calculated distances, entry points, and elevation. "That's what Dre's after," he murmured. "Not the land, what's underneath." Thomas nodded. "Your grandfather warned me. Said one day men with suits and money would come for what they didn't earn. He made me swear to protect it. I thought he was just paranoid." Lucas reached across the table and took his father's hand firm, grounding. "He wasn't wrong, and he's not the only one who's ready to fight for it." Thomas's eyes glistened in the flickering light, though he masked it with a chuckle. "You always did have your mother's stubbornness. She called it courage," Lucas replied with a faint smile. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with understanding. Outside, the wind began to pick up again, whispering against the window panes like distant voices. Ranger lifted his head and gave a low growl. Lucas turned. "What is it, boy?" The dog stared toward the door, ears pricked, muscles coiled. Thomas reached for the shotgun, leaning beside his chair, his instincts awakening instantly despite the years. Lucas moved to the window and peered through a thin slit in the curtain. The snow was thick, but through the gray-white swirl he saw a faint flicker light moving between trees, too steady for moonlight. He whispered, "Flashlight beams. 2, maybe 3. Thomas rose, his movement slow but deliberate. "Could be hunters." "Not at this hour," Lucas muttered. "And not this close to the cabin." Ranger let out another low growl, deeper this time. Lucas backed away from the window, keeping his voice calm. "Lights just went out. They know we saw them." Thomas's jaw set. "Then they're watching." For a few tense minutes, neither man moved. The only sound was the wind moaning around the cabin. Then, faintly, the distant crunch of retreating footsteps disappeared into the forest. Lucas waited another full minute before exhaling. "They're gone for now." Thomas sank back into his chair, the adrenaline fading from his face. "You see? They'll keep coming until they get what they want." Lucas folded the map and placed it gently back into the chest. "Then we'll make sure they don't find it." Thomas looked at him, firelight dancing in his eyes. "You're planning something, aren't you?" Lucas hesitated. "Clara's digging for proof. She meets me at midnight. If we can expose Dre before he moves, we might have a chance." Thomas gave a short laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "You were always the one to run toward the fight." Lucas shrugged. "Maybe I got that from you." The old man smiled faintly. "Maybe you did. But promise me one thing. "Luke, if this turns bad, you save yourself. Let the land go." Lucas met his gaze. "You'd never forgive me if I did." Thomas's eyes softened. "No," he admitted quietly. "I wouldn't." Outside, the storm's wind began to shift, carrying the low hum of an approaching vehicle down the ridge road, a sound too distant to act on, too near to ignore. Lucas moved to the window again, muscles tightening. But the headlights didn't appear this time. Whoever was coming knew how to stay hidden. The fire sputtered low, throwing sparks into the air like fading memories. Thomas leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, as if hearing the jungle again rain on leaves, the shout of a dying friend. "Loyalty," he whispered. "That's the only thing that lasts when everything else burns." Lucas stood beside him, his shadow stretching across the wall. "Then we'll hold the line together." Thomas opened his eyes, weary but proud. "Then God help whoever tries to cross it." And as the flames dimmed to embers, father and son sat in silence, two soldiers from different wars, bound by blood, memory, and the unspoken promise that no one would take Ironvale without a fight. The wind carried the faint, acrid scent of gasoline long before the fire came. It threaded through the cracks of the cabin windows like a whisper of warning, curling under the door and around Ranger's nose. The German shepherd jolted awake, ears pricking, hackles rising. He barked once sharp, urgent, a sound that didn't belong to dreams. Lucas Avery was on his feet in seconds, his soldier's instincts snapping back to life. He reached the window, heart pounding, eyes narrowing against the dark. Then he saw it, an orange flicker in the snow, growing fast, devouring the night with hungry light. "Dad!" he shouted, already moving. "Fire!" Thomas Avery burst from his room, still half-dressed, pulling on his heavy coat. "Where?" "The barn." The two men slammed through the cabin door and into the storm. The night air hit them like knives, but the heat from the flames bit harder. The barn, Thomas's pride, built by his father's own hands decades ago, was already half engulfed. The roof crackled, black smoke twisting into the frozen sky. Lucas grabbed the nearest shovel, throwing snow onto the fire in desperate rhythm. Thomas ran for the water pump, cursing under his breath as he dragged a frozen hose into place. Ranger darted between them, barking furiously toward the tree line. "Someone's out there," Lucas muttered, catching the glint of tire tracks illuminated by firelight. Thomas's voice shook, not from fear, but from fury. "They torched it. Those bastards actually—" "Dad, stay back!" Lucas yelled as a section of the roof collapsed with a roar. Sparks exploded like a swarm of fireflies. The heat forced them backward, sweat freezing on their faces, even as the snow melted beneath their boots. For several chaotic minutes, all sound became flame. The crack of burning timber, the hiss of melting snow, the bark of a dog who smelled not just danger, but trespass. By the time they got the last of it under control, the barn was a blackened skeleton against the white field. Thomas stood motionless, the shovel slipping from his hand. His breath came ragged. "That was your mother's garden," he whispered. The faint outlines of her old flower bed still smoldered. "She planted it after the war, said beauty should always grow where blood was spilled." Lucas placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "We'll rebuild it, but first we find who did this." Ranger barked again louder, insistent. He had wandered to the far end of the clearing, nose pressed to the ground. Then he bolted into the trees. "Ranger, heel!" Lucas called, but the dog ignored him, vanishing into the darkness. Lucas swore, grabbed his flashlight, and ran after him. Thomas, slower but stubborn as ever, followed with the rifle slung across his shoulder. "Don't you dare go alone," The forest swallowed them whole. The snow muffled their steps, the beam of Lucas's flashlight cutting thin tunnels through the mist. Ranger's tracks were easy to follow, paw prints in perfect formation, sharp and purposeful. Then came the sound, a faint hum, mechanical, steady. Lucas crouched, holding a hand to stop his father. Through the trees ahead, a faint red glow pulsed against the fog. "Stay behind me," Lucas whispered. They crept forward until the trees parted to reveal a clearing. There, half buried under snow, sat a black SUV, its engine still idling, exhaust rising in slow white clouds. The headlights were off, but the faint warmth from the hood told the story. Whoever had driven it had fled only minutes ago. Lucas moved closer, his pistol drawn. "Company car," he murmured, spotting the faint silver emblem on the bumper. "Drayland Holdings." Ranger growled softly, circling the vehicle, tail stiff, nose twitching. Thomas joined his son, scanning the ground. Tracks 3 men, maybe 4, headed downhill. Lucas opened the driver's door. It creaked slightly. Inside, the faint smell of smoke and cologne lingered, along with a half-empty gas can wedged on the passenger floor. On the dashboard sat a folded document, half-scorched along the edges, a permit, signed and stamped by Drayland's legal division. But it was the keychain that stopped him. Cold engraved initials. D.H. Thomas leaned in. "You know him?" "Damian Holt," Lucas said grimly. "Maxwell Dre's fixer. Ex-corporate enforcer. Used to handle logistics for Drayland's overseas operations. I met him once in Denver. Man's as subtle as a sledgehammer." Holt's reputation preceded him. Mid-40s, built like a linebacker gone to seed, with close-cropped hair and a jaw covered in stubble that looked permanent. He was the kind of man who smiled without warmth and shook hands like it was a test of dominance. People whispered he'd burned warehouses for insurance money and buried those who asked questions. Thomas spat into the snow. So he brought his fire tricks here. Lucas snapped a few photos with his phone license plate, gas can, the document, the keychain. Then he called Clara Monroe. She answered on the second ring, her voice low but steady. "Tell me you're calling from somewhere safe." "Define safe," Lucas said dryly. "The barn's gone. They used gasoline. SUV's still warm. Holt's fingerprints are probably all over it." There was a pause, then the sharp scratch of a pen. "Damian Holt," Clara repeated. "That's Dre's attack dog. He's been tied to at least 3 arsons in Nevada and Colorado, all linked to real estate seizures. Every time the evidence vanished in the flames, Lucas looked at the wrecked garden beyond the trees. He didn't vanish this time. "I'll get confirmation," Clara said. "There's a contact in Denver PD who still owes me. Holt's car should be registered under a shell company called Ironcrest Logistics. Get me the VIN number, and I'll trace it before morning." Lucas relayed the details, then hesitated. "Clara, this wasn't a scare tactic. They meant to destroy everything." Her tone hardened. "That means Dre's getting desperate. You've rattled him, or cornered him," Lucas said. "Either way," she replied, "he just declared war." The call ended, leaving only the wind. Lucas pocketed his phone and turned to his father. "She'll dig. We'll have proof soon." Thomas stared at the SUV, his breath steaming in the cold. "Proof's fine, but proof doesn't stop fire." Lucas said nothing. He knew the truth in that. Proof got men arrested. Fire got men buried. Ranger's low growl broke the thought. The dog was sniffing along the side of the vehicle, nose pressed against the back door. Lucas opened it carefully. Inside was a metal case, the kind used for sensitive equipment. He flipped it open. Inside lay a drone, sleek, black, the kind used for aerial mapping. The logo on its side read, Aether Survey Systems. Lucas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow. "They've been scanning the ridge," he said. "Mapping the underground network. That's how they knew exactly where to hit." Thomas exhaled slowly. "And now they know we're on to them." Lucas closed the case and looked out into the forest. Somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the smoke and greed, Maxwell Dre was watching through men like Holt, through lenses and satellites, and the invisible threads of power that reached even here. "Let him watch," Lucas muttered. "Because when I come for him, I want him to see it coming." The snow began to fall harder, covering the tire tracks inch by inch. Soon, the clearing would look untouched again, the SUV half buried under white silence. But the smell of gasoline lingered, a promise, not yet burned out. Ranger sat beside Lucas, panting, eyes bright with fierce awareness. Thomas looked at the horizon, where the last embers of the fire still glowed, faintly against the dark. "They took my barn," he said, voice low. "But they won't take this land." Lucas placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "No, Dad. They just gave us a reason to fight back." And, as the snow swallowed the flames, the two men stood together in the blackened field, one old, one scarred, and both unbroken, watching the night burn itself out on Ironvale Ridge. The temperature had dropped to 10 below by nightfall, the kind of cold that burned instead of bit. Snow hung thick in the air, like drifting ash, and Ironvale Ridge lay deathly still, except for the faint hum of generators behind the Avery cabin. Lucas Avery crouched near the tree line, hands raw from the wind, tightening the final cable of a motion sensor. The glow from his headlamp caught the thin plumes of his breath. Every few seconds, he glanced over his shoulder toward the cabin, a lone outpost of light in a sea of darkness. "Last one's live," said Sheriff Ryan Kellen, standing a few feet away, his gloved hands tucked under his armpits. His cheeks were red with cold, stubble dusted in frost. The man looked as though he'd been carved from the same mountain they stood on, broad, weathered, stoic. "If a squirrel sneezes out here, we'll know." Lucas gave a small nod. "Good. I'm not taking any more chances." Ranger trotted between them, leaving paw prints that steamed faintly in the freezing air. The dog's coat bristled as he scanned the tree line, tail stiff, alert. Ryan followed his gaze. "He hasn't relaxed since the fire." "Neither have I," Lucas muttered, checking his watch. "Clara should be setting up the upload by now." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Still, trust in that reporter?" "She's earned it," Lucas said. His tone left no room for debate. Inside the cabin, Thomas Avery was resting, the burns on his hands cleaned and wrapped. He had protested earlier, claiming he'd seen worse in '68, but exhaustion had finally pulled him under. Lucas had promised to wake him if anything happened. As the two men made their way back toward the porch, the wind shifted, the ridge moaned, the kind of deep, haunting sound that made the forest feel alive. Lucas turned, scanning the horizon one more time. "You ever notice how quiet it gets before something bad happens?" Ryan exhaled a laugh. "You're starting to sound like your old man." By midnight, the system was armed motion sensors, infrared beams, and 3 high-lumen floodlights rigged to an old generator. Clara's laptop pinged with the feed. She was online from a motel in Helena, preparing for the next day's operation. When she appeared on Lucas's screen, her hair was tied back, shadows under her sharp blue eyes betraying sleepless nights. "Everything ready on your end?" she asked. Lucas nodded. "We're baiting them tonight. They'll come back, Dre's kind always does when they think they've scared you enough." Clara's tone turned dry. "Let's make sure they regret the trip." The call ended. Lucas turned off the lights inside the cabin, plunging the interior into shadow. Outside, the snow glowed faintly, under the moon ghostly, silent, deceptive. The first alarm came just after 2:17 a.m. A sharp buzz cut through the cabin's silence, followed by Ranger's low growl. Lucas was already at the window, scanning the camera feed. 3 figures moved through the fog, black clothing, masks, rifles slung low. They advanced in formation, professional, confident. Ryan loaded his shotgun with slow precision. "Guess your bait worked." Lucas flicked a switch. The generator roared to life, and the floodlights blazed. For a moment, the night exploded into daylight. The intruders froze, caught in the glare silhouettes of trespassers in the white hell of Iron Vale's snow. "Sheriff's office!" Ryan bellowed, stepping onto the porch. "Drop your weapons!" The first man fired. The shot echoed across the ridge, splintering the edge of the cabin's doorframe. Lucas dove to the side, returning fire with disciplined control, 2 quick shots that hit the snow inches from their boots. A warning, not a kill. Ranger lunged from the shadows, teeth bared, sprinting through the snow like a black missile. The nearest attacker spun, panicking, but the dog was faster, tackling him hard enough to send the rifle flying. The man screamed, trying to wrestle free. Lucas was there a second later, pinning him down, ripping the mask off. The man beneath was young, early 30s, shaved head, a jagged scar slicing from his eyebrow to his cheek. Fear shone bright in his eyes. "Name?" Lucas barked. The man said nothing. Lucas pressed the pistol against his collarbone. "Name." "Brody," he gasped. "Brody Kane." The other 2 men were already on their knees under Ryan's shotgun, their weapons in the snow. Ryan's voice carried that hard, commanding authority that came from years of breaking up bar fights and domestic disputes. But this time, there was steel behind it. "You're done. Hands behind your head." Lucas dragged Brody toward the cabin, motioning for Ryan to follow. Inside, the heat from the wood stove hit them like a wave. Brody squinted against the sudden brightness, breathing hard, his eyes darting. Between the 2 men and the dog sitting motionless beside the door, watching him like a warden. Lucas stripped the gloves from Brody's hands and laid a folder on the table. "You torched my father's barn," he said evenly. "Why?" Brody hesitated, jaw clenching. "Orders." "Whose?" "Dre's," Brody said finally. His voice barely above a whisper, but not direct, came through Holt. Lucas exchanged a glance with Ryan. "Damian Holt?" Brody nodded. Sweat had begun to bead along his forehead despite the cold. "Dre's cleaning house. Anyone who knows too much gets burned literally. He's going public tomorrow. Big press event in Helena. The Iron Vale Resort Project, he's calling it. Some eco-sustainability crap." Lucas leaned forward. "What's the real plan?" Brody swallowed. "He's covering up the mine. Once he announces the resort, the lithium extraction starts under federal cover. They've got trucks waiting south of town. Ether Logistics. Same people who built the drones. It's all wired to go live tomorrow." Ryan let out a low whistle. "Christ. He's turning Iron Vale into his personal gold mine." Lucas's expression hardened, and he tried to erase the witnesses first. Brody's eyes flicked toward Ranger, who was still watching him without blinking. "You don't get it, man. Dre doesn't forgive betrayal. Holt's been tracking you since the fire. You think you've caught us?" "You're already on borrowed time." Lucas smiled coldly. "Then, I'll spend it well." He grabbed his phone, dialing Clara. She answered instantly. "We got one," Lucas said. "Name's Brody Kane. Holt's former crew. He confirmed the press conference tomorrow. Dre's using it to launch the cover-up." Clara's voice sharpened. "Then that's where we hit him." Lucas looked at Ryan. "We've got video evidence. The SUV, the fire, the arson orders. Clara's, uploading the files to a cloud server. Tomorrow, during Dre's speech, we broadcast it all. Ryan rubbed his chin. You're thinking of showing it live? Not just live, Lucas said. In his own conference. Clara's voice over the speaker crackled. I can handle the upload remotely. I'll splice the footage into their presentation feed. When Dre starts his speech, every camera in the room will show him ordering your father's property burned. Ryan gave a grim smile. Poetic. Lucas looked at Brody. You've got two choices. Help us shut him down, or spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. Brody looked between them, face pale. He'll kill me. Lucas's tone softened, though his eyes stayed sharp. Then make it count before he can. Outside, the storm picked up again, snow swirling violently against the windows like ghosts trying to break in. Ryan adjusted his coat. If we're doing this, we need to leave by dawn. It's a 2-hour drive to Helena in good weather. Lucas holstered his gun, checking the file one last time. Then, we leave before sunrise. Thomas appeared at the doorway, pale but awake. I heard enough, he said quietly. Do it. End this, son. Lucas met his father's gaze. I intend to. The fire snapped behind them, throwing sparks that looked almost like tiny embers of war. Outside, the sensors blinked red in the snow. Guardians of a cabin now turned command post. Ironvale's storm would hide their tracks. By dawn, they'd be ghosts on the road to Helena carrying justice, evidence, and the fury of men who had lost everything to fire. The dawn over Helena was sharp and metallic, the kind of cold that crept through suit fabric and camera lenses alike. The Helena Civic Convention Center gleamed under winter sunlight, banners reading, Ironvale Resort, building a greener tomorrow, fluttering outside in the wind. Beneath them, reporters gathered like restless crows, microphones clutched in gloved hands, waiting for a man who had built an empire on polished lies. Maxwell Dre emerged from his black limousine with a practiced smile. He was in his mid-50s, tall, broad-shouldered, his silver hair slicked neatly back, and his skin tanned to a hue that suggested expensive vacations. The lines around his mouth weren't from laughter, they were trenches carved by ambition. He wore a custom charcoal coat and an emerald tie, the color of money and envy. As he waved to the cameras, the diamond on his cufflink caught the light like a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen," he greeted as he ascended the steps, voice smooth and rich. "Today, we bring prosperity to Montana. The Ironvale Resort will stand as a symbol of progress, sustainability, and hope for generations to come." Inside the hall, the crowd erupted in polite applause. Rows of journalists, investors, and local officials filled the seats. At the back of the room, hidden in plain sight, Clara Monroe adjusted her press badge. Dressed in a beige overcoat, her auburn hair tucked beneath a gray beanie, she blended seamlessly into the crowd of correspondents. But her blue eyes were locked on the massive LED screen behind the podium. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but anticipation, as she tapped commands on a small tablet concealed beneath her notebook. 2 hours earlier, she'd met Lucas Avery and Sheriff Ryan Kellen in an abandoned rest stop off Route 15. The plan had been simple, but timing would be everything. Lucas had handed her the encrypted drive containing every piece of evidence, video footage of Dre's arson orders, drone scans, witness statements, financial ledgers, all gathered over sleepless nights. "Once he starts talking," Lucas had said, "show them who he really is." Now, as Dre's speech reached its crescendo, Clara's thumb hovered over the final command. Behind the stage, Damian Holt lingered near the equipment booth, his massive frame barely fitting into his suit. His eyes, small, gray and cold, swept the room like searchlights. The bandage on his left hand from the fire still peeked from under his cuff. He'd been summoned back to Helena under strict orders: protect Dre's image at any cost. His gut told him something was off, and Holt's instincts had saved him more than once on battlefields and boardrooms alike. He caught sight of a flicker on the backstage monitor. The conference feed briefly stuttered. "Tech," he muttered, motioning to the nearest staffer. "Check that. Now." But the young technician, barely 20, stammered, It's just buffering, sir." Holt's frown deepened. He'd seen buffering before. This was a takeover. Then it happened. Dre's confident baritone echoed through the hall. "We stand for transparency." The screen behind him flickered, once, twice, then dissolved into static. Murmurs rippled across the audience. "What the hell?" Dre muttered under his breath, glancing back. "Fix that feed." Holt lunged toward the control booth, but before he could reach it, the image stabilized. On the massive screen appeared the grainy video time-stamped, unmistakable. Dre's own voice filled the hall, colder and crueler than any speech. "Burn it. I don't care who's inside." "That land's worth more than their lives." The audience froze. The silence that followed was heavy enough to suffocate. Cameras clicked once, then erupted in a frenzy. Reporters shouted, "Mr. Dre! Is that your voice? Did you order the arson in Ironvale? Are you aware there were people inside that cabin?" Dre's face drained of color. "This is doctored," he snapped, forcing a laugh that died instantly. "A fabrication. My lawyers will—" Before he could finish, the doors burst open. A dozen state troopers entered, led by a broad-shouldered officer in a tan uniform. "Maxwell Dre," the officer announced. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, arson, and environmental fraud. Hands where I can see them." The crowd went wild. Photographers surged forward like a wave. Holt reached for Dre's arm, but two troopers intercepted him, forcing him to the ground. His furious snarl echoed through the room. Dre stood rigid, his hands trembling as they locked the cuffs around his wrists. The cameras captured every second the empire crumbling in high definition. And then, from the back of the hall, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Leave those cuffs on, officer," said Lucas Avery, stepping into the light. He wore a dark field jacket, snow still melting on his shoulders. Ranger, the German shepherd, walked beside him, head high, coat gleaming like shadow and flame. Gasps swept through the audience. Some recognized the name from Clara's reports, others from whispers online. Lucas's gaze locked on Dre. "You tried to bury a family for profit," he said, voice low but steady. "You burned our home. You sent men to kill us, but we're still here." Dre sneered through clenched teeth. "You think this changes anything? You're a soldier without a war." Lucas's expression didn't waver. "You're wrong. I just found one worth fighting." He turned to the press, his voice rising. "We didn't come here for revenge. We came for the truth. We're not just defending a piece of land, we're defending the right to call it home." The hall erupted in applause. Cameras flashed like lightning. Clara lowered her camera, a faint smile crossing her lips as tears threatened her composure. In that instant, all the long nights, the risk, the fear, they were worth it. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and clean, as if the world itself was trying to start over. 6 months later, spring returned to Ironvale Ridge. The snow melted into clear streams that wound through pine and stone. The cabin, rebuilt plank by plank, stood stronger than before. On the open field, Lucas moved through the training course, his whistle sharp against the morning air. Ranger darted across the ground, leaping over wooden barriers, responding to hand signals with effortless precision. His fur shimmered gold in the sun. His loyalty was as fierce as ever. The Avery K9 Training Center sign hung proudly near the gate, a modest wooden board carved by hand, painted in green and white. Veterans came here now, men and women scarred by different wars, to learn trust again through the dogs that understood them best. On the porch, Thomas Avery sat with a wool blanket over his knees, a mug of coffee in hand. His hair had turned fully white, but his eyes were the same clear blue that had watched countless dawns. He smiled quietly as his son worked, pride softening the weathered lines of his face. Beside him, Clara Monroe adjusted her camera. She was writing again, this time not about corruption or war, but about healing. The article would be called "The Soldier Who Kept the Mountain." As the shutter clicked, she glanced toward Thomas. "You ever think he'll rest?" Thomas chuckled. "My boy? Maybe when the mountain does." The wind shifted, carrying the sound of Ranger's bark, bright and fearless. Lucas turned, raising a hand in greeting, his smile reaching his eyes for the first time in years. The sun dipped lower, gilding the ridge in gold. The flag on the porch fluttered gently in the breeze, its colors worn but unbowed. Beneath it, father, son, and dog stood as one. Iron Veil Ridge had survived fire, greed, and storm. What remained was not just land, it was legacy. And when the light faded into the horizon, the mountain kept its silent promise that justice, though late, would always find its dawn. In the quiet after the storm, when justice had finally found its light over Iron Veil Ridge, the truth became clear. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels, but through the courage of ordinary hearts, refusing to give up. Perhaps that is how God works in this world, not by changing the mountains before us, but by giving us the strength to climb them. And if you believe that love, loyalty, and faith can still heal what's broken, then share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave your thoughts below. Subscribe for more stories of courage and redemption, and may the Lord watch over you and your home, now and always.